This is a grouping. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, Deputy McConalogue. So Deputy O'Sullivan to introduce the question.
Right, Minister, my question is in relation to the national audit on guidance counselling, which has been conducted by the Association of Guidance Counsellors. I know the question is 2011 to 2013, but they've actually brought it up to 2014 themselves.
Last Councillor.
107 and 120.
Yes, indeed. I'm taking, with the permission of the House,
thank you,
numbers 107 and 120. The survey quoted by Deputy O'Sullivan is focused on guidance counsellors and in particular on the time spent by them in a one-to-one setting, giving career guidance and student counselling. It is important to note that guidance is a whole school activity and it does not just involve the guidance counsellor. Therefore, the implications of the survey are somewhat limited. Wherever possible, group work and class-based activity should be used to maximise the amount of time available for those pupils that are in the most need of one-to-one support. Section 9C of the Act requires schools to use their available resources to ensure that students have access to appropriate guidance to assist them in their educational and career choices. Given that guidance is a whole school activity and does not just involve the guidance counsellor, the type of data suggested by the Deputy would not give the complete picture on guidance provision. The returns that the Department receives from schools is focused on pupil enrolments, and this information is used to determine staffing and grant allocations. I don't intend to add to the administrative workload of schools by requiring them also submit the type of information suggested by the Deputy. The Department does not hold any information on guidance counsellors. The Department doesn't hold any information on guidance counsellors and whether they hold a qualification. Having teachers trained as guidance counsellors is of course valuable, but given that it is a whole school activity, we need to be careful that an emphasis on qualifications does not result in a restriction on who can contribute to the needs and best welfare of students. In relation to the number of hours guidance counsellors were given to their work, it should be noted that schools have autonomy on managing guidance provision from within their standard staffing allocations. I don't intend to micromanage schools in relation to guidance, or indeed the subject choices that they make. Furthermore, I'm reluctant to add to their administrative workload by requiring them to make over-detailed returns to the Department. I'm confident schools act in the best interests of students when determining how best to use the teaching resources available to them.
The findings from the audit that the guidance counsellors themselves did was also supported by the review from the National Centre for Guidance Excellence, and their recommendation was for the ex-quota allocation for guidance to be restored. Now, I totally accept what you say, that guidance is a whole school activity. But there is a need within schools for somebody to drive that. And with other cutbacks, the whole sort of middle management layer, particularly the voluntary secondary schools, which I know, has gone. So there's even more onus left on the principals, and they just simply have too much work to do to be the driver of this. What you have got within the guidance counselling is a person who does have a basic qualification, but I would know, and I'm sure you do too, that so many other guidance counsellors, at their own expense and in their own time, have gone on and they've done considerable courses in counselling and in psychotherapy, and I think those people are not being fully utilised. Now, I won't argue with you about the figures and the way in which they are collected, but I am talking about people whom I know in the system and the impact of that. The big emphasis is on mental health and promoting mental health, and we are eliminating a group of people who are highly skilled, who can be part of that process, and I think we're missing out on those skills.
Minister.
Well, I welcome the Deputy's comments and acknowledge her own personal experience in the area. I don't intend to go back to the ex-quota system. I would love to see extra resources become available so we could increase the staffing allocation generally. But it's for the school leadership and the principal of the school to decide how best to deploy those resources. So I think I'm at variance with some of the people in the Institute of Guidance here in Ireland on that regard. However, the point that you make about teachers with a basic secondary qualification, if you like, upskilling themselves, and there's evidence, largely anecdotal, but we'll soon have it statistically, of massive investment in CPD by teachers across a whole spectrum of areas, of which counselling and guidance is but one of them. And I would like to see that recognised in the first instance, and hopefully the Registrar of the Teaching Council will be able to do that, so we wouldn't have to do this sort of statistical exercise that the Deputy is talking about, but also that we would be able to make sure that we get the best use of that skill set in a school.
Thank you,
I do accept, and I've accepted both with the 2 teachers' unions at post-primary level, the impacts taken back as far as 2009 of various budgets have hollowed out a degree of middle management that needs to be restored as soon as is possible, and I intend to do
Thank
that.
you, Minister. Yeah, briefly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I do acknowledge in their report is that 96% of guidance counsellors are released from their schools for supervision, and I think that's very good. But the other statistic is that it's the fee-paying schools who have lost less from the impact of what's happening with guidance counsellors. And again, to acknowledge that any ill that comes up in society, the answer is the schools will deal with it, and we're losing the skill set of a group of people who can be leaders on that particular aspect, whatever that ill is that comes up in society.
Deputy, very brief.